Hello world, Great Giza Pyramid. You can find more information at GIZA.ws, and you can contact me by contact.giza.ws or contact@giza.ws or greatgizapyramid.com or gizapyramidproject.com. So what I'm going to talk about today is the Great Giza Pyramid. Most everything, should have erased this first, that you have been told about the structure is most likely incorrect. I would like to talk about the structure itself. And I guess I can edit out wiping this off later. I really shouldn't have left it here for a long period of time because look at that nasty stain it's going to leave. Oh well. I do not wish to focus on the Giza tomb theories, stories, or anything of that nature. I wish to focus on the structure, the configuration of the structure. If someone has pictures, photos, or video, or can give me firsthand information of being in there and can remember something, I have certain sections that I have questions on, and I'd be more than happy to reach you. You can contact me with Skype, WhatsApp, Google Hangouts. You can message me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook, although Facebook and stuff like that I do not really babysit very often. So let's start with my pens. Why did I hide them all over there? First off, let's look at the main structure, the Giza Pyramid. It stands on the plateau, like so. I'm going to quickly go over the other two pyramids. The next one up, they're not right next to each other, but because of space, I'm going to draw them physically right next to each other. The other one stands about 40 feet higher and goes up slightly bit taller than it, but it happens to be less, well, I'm not going to get into the mass and stuff like that. This one sits another 10 feet up and is half the size. Okay, so those are the three primary structures. Now there's 9 other structures. I call this Pyramid 1, Pyramid 2, Building 7, and the other ones. I have videos where I go over how I label them, but we can skip all that. We're going a quickie here. For this whole thing, it is, you have to understand when we get into the guts on the inside, the guts in here are at an elevation where they're at the same elevation as what they like to call the Queen's chamber level. The guts in here go down, across, and up, and are at that same level. And the guts here, because it's actually higher, the guts beneath here, the way they are, they're actually at that same elevation as well. So this is all a rather large system when you look at it. But let's get back to the primary structure, because that is what we want to focus on. That's what everyone really cares about. These other ones I can tell you about, but you're not interested in them yet. So here we go. We have the structure. Now, if, like the structure next to it, it had a pointy top, then any ambient static electricity that brush discharged against it would vent up into the atmosphere up there and would discharge down to ground. But this structure they lob the top off of and have a ring at the 35th level intentionally to quarantine the static to the surface. Now in my pyramid phrenology videos, we go over the elevations of all the steps and how the static electricity is kind of manipulated on the surface. But for right now, let's just stick to the issue that the static electricity is quarantined to the surface of the structure until it gets enough capacity that it can either jump that gap or discharge off into the ether. But for right now, it's hanging out there. Well, let's just go over the structure. We're not going to go over jumping. Just imagine this as being a big Van de Graaff generator charged by static, like by the wind blowing back and forth. End of story. We're not going to go any further. The 35th level is actually, wrong pen, is actually the entrance, what they like to call the main entrance, is below that, goes down, underground, levels out just before the center, and they've got one primary large room in there, one little room before it, and what they like to call a dead-end shaft. Now, in my system down under, I review the whole section. But for right now, what we're going to focus on is the pit. Oh, at the same elevation as the top here, there's a shaft that, just like your sink in your toilet, there's a little jug handle thing and goes up. Ground level, physically, the way I drew this, would be about here, all the way across. The area from about, well, we don't know how far it goes down, but the area here is all limestone, all down here, crossing over, down there, around here. So this whole thing is encapsulated in limestone. We don't know how far out the limestone goes, but the whole substructure is encapsulated in a limestone-like environment, with the exception of the pit in the subterranean chamber, which I should have colored pens for the sake of, I'm going to make this one green. And the other spot is the pit in the grotto. And I'm not really going to sketch in the grotto very well because I'm not a super mathematician or a super drawing artist here. So we'll just have to work with little bubbles. You can look up pictures of the grotto. I have them photos.GIZA.ws or photos.GreatGizaPyramid.com. You can get to the pictures and you can look at them for yourself. Or use your magic search engine of your choice. And then from there it goes up. The down shaft from up here comes down at that same level. There. And then this is, now this whole section, if I was to draw it, would take up the bottom, I think it's about 20% of the structure. But because I don't want to squeeze it in that, I'm going to embellish the size, just because, like I said, I'm not a super artist. Come over. This would be like, they like to call it the King's Chamber. I will draw some other pieces of it in a second. This is the long hallway. The Queen's Chamber, which has the vaulted ceiling A, and well, sketching the details later. So this is the model that I work with. What I like to point out is most everything up in here is granite. Everything down here is limestone, with the exception of that which goes to earth and this which goes to earth. And now I'm going to fill in little pieces. There is a conduit that comes out of here. It is the one and only one that actually breaches the surface of the structure. There is a conduit that comes out of the north side. This is the north side. This is the south side. This is a 2D slice through the structure. It is made in a 2D plane, and well, we can go over that when we talk about communication within the structure. But for right now, just work with this as the model. The elevation of both of these two conduits is identical with some variations. We'll get into those when we get into the fine points, or you can look at that where I talk about the upper system in my videos, where we go over the elevations of things in here. But conduit comes out. It goes about 1/3 of the way into the what they like to call the antechamber, the pre-chamber to the king's chamber, and then it curves and starts to protrude up, and then straightens back out as it continues to protrude up and goes up to, if I had drawn this properly, this is actually, it comes up and it pierces here through that. So if I was to draw it that way, it'd be like this. It also pierces through on a 2D plane looking at it where the boss mark is. And again, photos of these pieces and parts you can find, but I'm just referencing them for reference points. Comes up and then it goes up. And from my understanding, it winds up hitting this structure at about the, what is it, 102nd or 103rd level. I think that was 102nd, and this one's 103rd level, elevation, course. Not super important, but thought it was kind of interesting that this one was one step higher in elevation. It does not actually pierce the structure, comes to the surface of the structure and just kind of gets to there. That static electricity that's on the surface, it doesn't need to have a physical thing. It kind of will go through the rock. This is the model. So here really quickly, and I'll fill in pieces and parts later, but let me give you my scenario on what I believe is occurring. And I did not draw, well, I kind of did. The outside, there would be a moat. And there's evidence of this if you look for it, if you wish to. If not, that's fine. There's evidence of a moat around all of the structures. The Building 7 structure had a very shallow moat, but because it was at a higher elevation, it was at the same elevation as this. And the center pyramid would have an elevation, again, the outside moat would be at the same elevation around its structure. I do not believe that they were all actually connected on their pools, but we'll get into that more later. The water would saturate the whole system up to in the section there. As the grand gallery comes down to the spillway, there is a part where it goes down to the grotto area, right down there. That is where the elevation of the water would come to by default. That elevation would actually be below where, if this was here, it would be below that mark. I believe, oh, what I didn't draw is there's a thing right there. I believe that would be in this hallway on the step. There's a cutout, about like so. You can find pictures of it. I'll gladly show them to you if you can't. I believe it would be at that same elevation, which is the same elevation that in the niche within the chamber here, people know what it looks like. I didn't draw this very well, so I can't draw that tall. But there is a step within there that is at that same elevation. And that's a water line, an elevation mark. But that's when we get into communication. I'm skipping ahead. We're just looking at what it would do. That would be the market at which it would fill. I say that because the inlet is made like so. That's a poor rendition. Made like so. This isn't a magic marker, is it? No. The chevron, it's not really built like that. The chevron looking piece are right here. You can see those. Well, you can find pictures of them if you can. I'll show you later. But, and I'm drawing this at about, I'm drawing at an elevation too high. But they had to dig through the loosely fitting rock that was in here when they first dug in. So for right now, let's just say there's loosely fitting rock. We're not going to get into the pressures and water in there just yet. Within this system, as it sits, we have aquifers running beneath it. If you look at my plateau video, I explain how I believe the Nile was routed around and then piped through the channels beneath it, going east to the west. Sorry, west to the east, going from the west side of the structure to the east side of the structure back towards the Nile itself. With some manipulation of other things, we can get into in other videos, or I did get into other videos. Let's just say that between the ground state and the aquifers that they manipulate beneath the structure, this becomes the positive side, this becomes the negative side between those two energy states. And what's going to happen is oxygen is going to be generated down here. Hydrogen is going to be generated up here. Through many manipulations, I believe some of the origins are going to be the granite rocks. We're going to act as doorknobs when you're on a dry and staticky day and you touch a doorknob, you get a shock. The same way, the water within the solution is going to react within the metals within the granite and will give it a surface point to, just like when you're boiling water, it finds a crack or something, that it finds the point where it can easily most exchange its energy. But between this system, we're going to just set it up with a cathode and anode, and we're going to watch how the system grows. Oh, I didn't point out in our model, coming out of the southern wall, as they say, and the way this structure is built, the southern wall is, I believe it's actually the top part of the grotto. When you look at it, you'll see what I'm talking about. And it's piped over through the limestone. and then up into the structure and piped into the top of the king's chamber. And from there, we pipe it down, but we're going to get to that after we watch what happens. Oxygen is going to bubble up into here. It's going to cycle out through the system up, and it's just going to vent out. It's a byproduct. We don't care about it. The hydrogen is going to bubble out of here. It's going to be captured within this bubble under the surface of the water. It's going to bubble out, and it's going to be piped up to the top. No problem. We want it up there. End of story. As this is occurring, the oxygen coming here has to fight through these rocks to get out. And in doing so, it's going to create a back pressure. As it creates a back pressure, it's going to elevate the water within this chamber. But because this is about a meter cubed, as it's pushing down, because as soon as it breaks the surface tension of, or the elevation of there, it has such a long hallway to go. For every like couple of feet there is just an inch here. So it's got a lot of space to fill. Plus it's got the pool over here. So what we're going to wind up doing is emptying this and bringing it down and separating this system independent of the pool of water outside that's going to be gapped by a pool of primarily oxygen. Since the hydrogen and the oxygen are separating, that's going to be your gap. Now the hydrogen we're going to bring up to the top, and using the pressure, we're going to bring it down actually slightly beneath the floor level of the king's chamber, where in the back corner they've since put a metal plate, and there's about a 10-foot hole down there. And we're going to have that pre-filled with some water, just normal every day. We're not going to use tap water. We don't need fluoride in it, although I'm not sure they have fluoride over there in Giza, but Egypt. But let's just, for the sake of water, we'll use salt water. Great. It doesn't matter. In the long run, it ain't going to matter. But the hydrogen is going to bubble up through the water, and that's going to be a flashback arrestor. What for? Well, when you're working with hydrogen, you don't really like to mix that static and hydrogen. If you ever worked with hydrogen, you do everything you can to keep away from static electricity. In this case, we want it. So this whole area is going to fill with the hydrogen bubbling up through and into the system. And it doesn't really matter what it does in the system, because it doesn't matter. This is just ambient air out here with this one conduit that can lead down, and hydrogen and static electricity that's gathering here, and this perfectly square room with that funny looking box in there. Eventually you're going to get a spark through just nature. It's going to happen. And if it isn't, well, I'll tell you what, you can stand in that room filled with hydrogen and just sign your will before you go in there. Spark. Once the spark happens, you're going to get a fire. That fire is going to yield water. That water is going to wind up filling this. Now, one of the things that is said, and we have to replace into the system, is when they came up into the system, they broke through the rocks here. They drilled around them. They didn't actually go through them. So we're going to replug them up. Of course, we did already. That's how this filled up to there, but didn't go down. I didn't really point out, and you can look at it, that there's a little hump that's at a higher elevation than this elevation here, so that the water will fill into here and won't actually spill down into there. That water winds up being special. We'll get into that. The where was I? Water. Up here, we're going to re-add in that upper section where it goes to the Grand Gallery, pre-subterranean chamber, and then King's Chamber. Conduit comes out, winds up going up, piercing there. I did this one a little bit better. The boss mark is here, what they like to call the thieves tunnel. That little circle I drew right there, that's there. And the conduit that comes between them is at the same elevation as here, because thieves tunnel goes down in about 3 feet, turns over, and then protrudes straight back again. And then I think it goes down just as deep. I'm not 100% sure. I'd really like to get some better pictures. Might be at a slightly higher elevation from what I feel, but really the structure is the structure. And if I get pictures, I have to yield to what the structure is at this point. Embellishing a little bit because I'm assuming. But within this structure, and over here is where the output is, over here, and pit, the box. All right. Hallway. Yeah. Get all that? That is right here. We're going to re-put the wall right there, which will allow the water level to fill this entire section. Okay, that's this section right here. Oops. That section. The way I drew it, not that section. All right. This water level will fill until it gets to the point where it's going to choke itself off, because this is its oxygen supply. The hydrogen is going to constantly keep coming in from down here, where there's actually the inlet. It's going to be bubbling up through the water. That will be your flashback arrestor, so that the reaction, the furnace that is happening within here, which is both a furnace because it's burning, but a vacuum because as the hydrogen and oxygen burn together, they take up less volume, which is creating a little bit of a vacuum pressure, which is sucking up the water in here just a little bit and causing a tiny bit of a vacuum within the pulling the air in. So as it pulls the water up, it pulls the air in. Now this wall actually goes up to a higher elevation, so it doesn't have any problem with how high it has to be. Got plenty of play in there. The section within here is up for some negotiation as to how exactly it was configured, because they did have to break through it. And I'm going to appeal to anyone who can get me photos within this area, because again, the structure will speak for itself. But for right now, I'm going to do some embellishment in here from the way that I understand things to be. But again, I will appeal to the photos to basically, I want to reverse engineer the structure, not embellish or re-engineer the structure. But I do have to embellish the parts that I believe to be, until I can find them, well, for right now. And I'm open to listen to anyone. But there will be an opening. I do not, from anything I see that this was actually connected to the floor, which will allow a constant flow of a set regulated amount of water out through the system. The floor actually drops down. It's just about a quarter of an inch right there, so that the water coming from within this tunnel, we'll get to that when we get into more of the system here in a second, will always only flow this way. But the primary stream will flow down. It falls down the funnel. If you look at pictures of what they like to call the grand step, it was a funnel before we filled it in, so that people didn't play a slippy slide down the middle of it there. They wanted to make it good for tourism. But prior to that, it was a funnel. That water would run down basically the center of the funnel, down, and fall into the pool on top of or joining the water which is already in the system. The excess would flow down and into the system and just join the pool of water down there to get cracked and do it again. Now, a couple of things. As this is all occurring, up here, you're going to be generating some steam, water vapor. You're making water vapor. As that is occurring, the water level is done so that in this particular conduit, and I didn't quite draw it super well, but about, from what it looks like, 2/3-ish of the way back, the elevation of the top goes up about an inch or so, about the same level that the opening that goes up. How does that actually go? I guess it goes like this. Okay, here, if you look at it this direction, this being the score mark that is at the top of here, would be the same as here. That score mark, this score mark, the same elevation that goes up, this goes up, which I believe will give the water to be riding just above that roof line. And as that water rides just above the roof line, it will allow condensation to be on there. Now, exactly why I'm not sure, but since I'm putting this out to bright minds, I have pointed out that this is air. A2, air. I don't know what the actual symbol is for air. Air is 78% N2 and 21% O2. And when the hydrogen burns with the oxygen to create the water, you're going to have a plethora of hydrogen, which is in here with an already lit burning and an ample supply of nitrogen. And just to make Al Gore happy, some carbon dioxide might sneak in there. So we're incinerating carbon dioxide too. So this is a green. Okay, let's get past that. I believe we're going to have something else, but for right now, let's just focus on the water. Water generates steam. Steam, under the way the system is working, vibrating up and down with the pulsation, because that's just the way nature works. You're going to have waves and balances and stuff. You're going to be forcing the water vapor up this conduit. As it goes up this conduit, the vapor will condensate on the conduit walls, and in doing so, will pick up some of that static electricity that's on the outside of the structure. It doesn't have to pick up a lot of it, as long as it picks up more than it didn't have before. It has more than it didn't have before. And it will deplete a little bit from the outside. That's okay, nature will add some more. But as more and more the system goes, it's going to be working that static down into the system. It's going to work its way down into the poorly drawn system there. And eventually you might even have some driplets of water that work their way down. And basically those driplets of water are going to work their way down, and the steam and blah, 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 until the driplets of water are going to be falling down into the tunnel, which is about 6 feet that direction, which is, if you were to slice this sideways, at the same location as this box, only in the wall. Not a big deal until you get into communication, but just pay attention to that. Falls down there. I believe that when this works out, if there's another liquid involved, that you're also going to get, with this dripping down here, and from the scarring I can see on the and the way that the boss mark is made, I believe you're going to get drips going down from both sides, and you may have a Lord Kelvin-like scenario. And I believe the spark will be generated on this side of the equation, the spot with the boss mark, which will create a spark, which is actually going to ignite whatever gases are in here, which will force a push of flame out this way, which will account for the scorching on the top of the structure there, and the scarring on the top of the sides of the structure here, which will also force the gas and condensation that's coming down this way, because it's being forced out here, which I'm going to call the charged steam at this point, out into the Grand Gallery. Grand Gallery is a vaulted structure. It actually has a unique structure where it is like so. So as this condensation forms and drips, it comes down to an edge and has no choice but to drip. Now it can run down a little bit because it's on the whole structure is this way for, a good long time. Things 150 feet or something like that. It's a pretty large structure when you look at it all. So it may run down a bit, but it'll eventually drip. And every time it drips, it's going to be pulling more of this static electricity down into the system. Even if one of those drips happens to discharge to another drip right behind it, that drip is going to be falling and it might discharge, and you might get some really cool play of static electricity in there. It would be fun to have a little webcam in there to watch it all. And, I think it would be cool. But you can see how this whole system is kind of bringing the static electricity down into the system, more and more and more down into the system. So eventually, it's going to bring it down to the same elevation that it can get via nature. But it can't get any lower via nature because, well, it can as soon as it exceeds its capacity. Below that, because of that stopgap. We also have a nice plane of water outside there, and that all adds as a little bit of resistance, so the static electricity here kind of almost has nowhere else to go. You give it the path of least resistance and then give it a lot of coaxing and pushing. The steam is now kind of riding above the water, and it may actually be held apart by static electricity, the difference, or it may be discharging to the pool. But either way, this pool of water is isolated from the pool outside. So whatever energy it dissipates to it is still retained within the pool. And then the pool itself will discharge itself because the pool itself is all up in here. The oxygen bubble here keeps it separated. And down in here, the only places it has are these two locations. And I think they're playing off each other. And there's more to the system that isolates the gases. But in our setup, we're going to look at it like this just to watch the system. We'll worry about the pros and cons and how nature does it more when we really expand on it. But in this classroom experiment, this is how we're working. So here we go. We got this static electricity captured within this room, and the pieces I didn't draw are there are two conduits that, again, just like how this conduit doesn't connect to the outside world, these conduits didn't connect to there either. They come down and they touch it. This one actually goes around the back here and goes up. Both of those, from what I understand, go about 2/3 of the way towards the surface. They don't really go much more than that. And if I was to draw it correctly, I think they actually go slightly below that. But I'd like to be corrected on that because that may be more relevant down the road. What is really kind of relevant is in third structure over. The internal guts of it have the internal structure comes down on the inside to an elevation which is equal to that on the inside. And then the outside structure, where there's the steps kind of, is at the same elevation as the queen's level there. But, you know, that's only if you care about the communication. So we're not going to stress that, but just pay attention so you can, when you're looking at things, engaging things, you can see the elevations because they're talking if you listen. But the static electricity here trapped within our little bubble system there, we are going to give it two options. This option, because we're actually going to bring up a liquid that I don't know if there's a gas within here or if just the liquid being there at the elevation is enough. But from the building 7, the third of the larger structures, third largest structure on the plateau, we're going to bring and fill a liquid into here for the sake of things. We should make that a different color. That's our ground, so it should kind of be brown, right? Brown is ground. Today, ground will be purple. And we're going to have it at an elevation. Like I said, the outside level, the water is going to be here. So it's at about yo elevation. And it goes down. And remember, this side, the structure actually goes to the side. So it can come down. And I believe it actually goes out the north side through the conduits underneath and shorts. Well, it wouldn't be north. It would be from here, it would be the east side of the structure around this being the structure, and shorting to there. This pool indirectly through a battery, unless the battery is actually under here, we're going to get to that maybe, comes up and it winds up having a conduit which hovers at that elevation. And this one bleeds off to the battery and then to the center building, because this is the draw through the battery, which is your capacitor, a higher capacity than this. And you're going to milk the static electricity out of the room through the wall, which is why they found the crack, or why the crack was formed. Went through the crack to find the conduit. Conduit, if they would follow it up, leads to here. Now, if it doesn't actually lead to here, it is possible that they were transmitting it. You know, we could be talking Tesla stuff here. But from the way it looks, I believe it was arcing through the rock to the solution or just to the conduit itself. And with the metal being here, it could have arced between the two and gone to the water, taking the path of least resistance. It could have arced that for 60-some feet. You know, electricity will take the path of least resistance, whatever it can find. If it can generate enough of it, if the capacity of this whole structure can generate enough to do that, it would do that. It would arc to there to there. And they wanted to make sure that one of them probably is 10 feet shorter than the other, or 11.2 or something like that. And this will make it so the electricity goes the way they want. And also, any electricity that happened to go out through here would dissipate back into the grand gallery and get caught into the system and kind of been to one of those PMHs that Ed Leet Scallon plays with. So the energy would get caught in the system instead of bleeding out. 7 would be your ground, which is where the energy initially wants to get to, but can't. And the center structure is less than ground, and where it kind of pulls it to, because the center structure has the antenna that vents it off, where this doesn't vent it off. We can get into more of the construction of the other two structures later. But that's about as where I am on this structure. Like I said, I will gladly communicate with anybody on the configuration. If they think I'm missing a piece or part, I didn't really go into the niche and how it's configured or why, because when you look at it, it only supports this, the condensation within the structure, the way it's over in the niche won't fall down. If you look at the grooves within the structure, if you're looking into the structure at the, I got to put one more step there, at the grooves, they're kind of coming down this way, so that any condensation would be drawn this direction towards the center of the room, so that when it drips down that one edge, breaks the surface with the wall, it is more towards the center. It is towards the center, but because the center is actually right here, it is not actually towards the center. Within its confined environment, it is more to the one side, but within the room, it is closer to that side, which is closer to this side. So any reaction has a higher chance of connecting with this conduit than it does with that conduit, because you've skewed the odds. And well, that's my system. Like I said, I'd be glad to debate with anybody, be glad to talk with anybody. I'd be glad to go over how to read the system. I did allude to the pressures within here, and I go over that in some of my videos. And right now I don't want to go into more detail, but when you get into it, this adds additional pressure, which actually will help to elevate the waters within here. I'd also like to talk to somebody about the environment within this system, because since you're capping it off here and you're capping it off here, the environment within the center, because of how it's condensating, I believe it winds up being a negative pressure. And that would kind of add to the mixture and would skew variables on things. So, well, that's about as much as I can think. Thank you very much for your time. You're welcome to email me, text me 24/7. You can leave me voicemail 24/7. I can respond to things within the US. If you're out of the US, please leave an email or WhatsApp or Skype or something that I can respond to you at, because I can't text out of the country and I can't call out of the country other than one of the other formats. So thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Please drive through.